Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Press Club, Brussels, for our event on Boycott Beijing 2020. What we're doing here is we're really asking for a diplomatic boycott by the EU of the Beijing Olympics. Let me emphasize diplomatic. We're not talking about an athletic boycott. We're asking the European Union to send no diplomats or officials to Beijing on the basis of China's continued appalling human rights record. We have a very interesting lineup of speakers today who will each discuss certain aspects of those abuses to support those claims. Now, we believe that the European Commission will be discussing this tomorrow, 5th of January, which is why we chose today. We also will be connecting with a number of manifestations. Across Europe, there are a lot of manifestations going on, various human rights groups, climate campaigners, calling for this diplomatic boycott. We will hopefully be connecting with Brussels, with Geneva, and hopefully with Berlin over the next couple of hours. But first of all, what I will do is I will give the floor to our keynote speaker, who is Mr. Peter van Dalen, member of the European Parliament, who has been very, very outspoken on this particular issue. And so we're very, very glad to have him with us this morning. So, Mr. van Dalen, if I can pass the floor to you.
Good morning. Yes, thank you very much. I hope you can hear and see me. Member States, thank you. Member States and the EU institutions, including the European Parliament, should go for a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Games. What we see is that the Xi Jinping government tyrannizes Uyghurs, Tibetans, Christians, and those in Hong Kong who cry for freedom. The oppressive Chinese policies are structural. In particular, the systematic oppression of the Uyghur minorities by the Chinese regime has already been labeled as genocide by several parliaments. And the informal Uyghur tribunal also recently came to that conclusion. The world should give a clear signal to Beijing that we fully disapprove these policies. So we should have at least have a diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics. And I see two more reasons why we need a boycott of those games. First of all, we see an ever-growing aggressiveness of the Xi Jinping government towards Taiwan. Several times a week, we see Chinese threats on sea and by air towards Taiwan. Sometimes more than 50 planes, including jet fighters and bombers, threaten the air defense zone of Taiwan. This is a serious and constant threat to the regional peace and stability, and this is unacceptable. And therefore, the international community should give a clear signal to the Chinese to stop these provocations. In my opinion, it's therefore absolutely vital that we have a diplomatic boycott of the Winter Games. And there is also another issue at stake that, to my observation, is underexposed. It is the Chinese involvement in forced organ transplants. The chairman of the Uyghur Tribunal, the British lawyer Sir Geoffrey Nice, also pronounced a verdict 2 years ago in another investigation, that of the China Tribunal. This tribunal, made up of lawyers and medical specialists, investigated allegations of forced organ transplants in China. It concluded that the involvement of the Chinese government in what we now know as organ harvesting is beyond dispute. The crux of the matter is that prisoners in China are being executed for the purpose of harvesting their organs for commercial organ transplants. The China Tribunal suspects that between 60 and 90,000 transplants take place every year in China. And in the official records, we only read about 10,000 transplants. So a large part is kept off the books. So it is suspected that forced transplants are taking place at a large scale. And if this wasn't bad enough, the victims are often prisoners of conscience, most of them Uyghurs, followers of the Falun Gong, and Christians. I consider China to be a rogue state because its regime there systematically commits crimes against humanity. And the governments of the EU member states and the representatives from the EU institutions must therefore stay at home in February. In such a boycott, the issue of organ harvesting should certainly be addressed. That would be an important step to draw attention to this crime. It is not allowed to enjoy bread and games while the government of the organizing country allows innocents to suffer and die in prison and then deprive them of their organs. The Beijing Games will be abused by the Chinese government to show to the world how great and lovely China is. For me, these games provide the opportunity to publicly denounce all the issues of Chinese suppression I have just mentioned. So the best way to show our contempt of Xi's policies is to stay away from the Olympic Winter Games in China. Thank you very much.
Mr. van Dalen, thank you. Before, I was going to hand over to Willy Fautré, who's here with me now from Human Rights Without Frontiers. But before I ask Willy for your comments on this, could I just maybe go straight away to Benedict Rogers from Hong Kong Watch? Very keen to hear what you've got to say, because of course, Hong Kong in the news today with the sentence handed down, I think it was yesterday or this morning, to one of the most prominent human rights activists in the, sorry, I still think of Hong Kong as I would refer to it as the colony, because it's been a long time since those, that's changed. But Benedict, if I can go straight over to you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can you all see me and hear me?
Absolutely.
Great. Well, it's a great pleasure and privilege to join you today from London. And can I begin by really associating myself with Mr. van Dalen's remarks. It's worth just reminding and reiterating that the current regime in Beijing is pursuing the most widespread and the most severe crackdown on human rights across the board since the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989, and in some respects, arguably, since the Cultural Revolution. And as Mr. van Dalen has already laid out, it stands accused not only by the Uyghur Tribunal, but also by the parliaments of several EU member states, the Netherlands, Belgium, the Czech Republic, and Lithuania, as well as the parliaments of the UK and Canada and others of genocide against the Uyghurs, and of course the issue of organ harvesting, the repression in Tibet, the persecution of Christians, the crackdown on civil society, lawyers, independent media, citizen journalists, and all forms of dissent in mainland China. But in Hong Kong, the regime has totally dismantled freedoms that were promised under an international treaty, the Sino-British Joint Declaration, which provided for Hong Kong for at least the first 50 years from the time of the handover, which was 1997. So at least until 2047, Hong Kong was promised under an international treaty that its high degree of autonomy and basic human rights would be protected. And the Chinese regime has flagrantly breached that treaty repeatedly over the last few years. It has torn up the concept of one country, two systems, which was the principle on which Hong Kong was handed over to China. And that's less than halfway through the 50-year period that it was supposed to apply for. Today, most of my friends and most prominent pro-democracy leaders in Hong Kong are either in prison, on trial, in exile or are keeping their heads down. And as you've mentioned, only today, Chow Hang-tung, a young barrister and activist in Hong Kong, has been sentenced to a second term. She's already currently serving one prison term. She's been given another 15 months simply for having organized a peaceful candlelit vigil to remember the Tiananmen massacre. Last week, we saw what I would describe as the final burial of press freedom in Hong Kong, with the closure of two of the last remaining Chinese language independent media outlets, Stan News and Citizen News, and the arrest of several journalists, as well as the arrest of one of Hong Kong's most popular pop singers and one of its leading barristers. And just before Christmas, we saw the destruction late at night of memorials to the Tiananmen Square massacre, the Pillar of Shame and other statues from university campuses in Hong Kong. Earlier in December, we saw sham so-called elections, I call them selections, to Hong Kong's legislature, in which no pro-democracy candidate was allowed to contest a seat. Candidates were pre-screened to test their loyalty to Beijing. The number of directly elected seats were reduced and the number of Beijing appointed seats increased. And those selections removed anything that was left of Hong Kong's limited democracy. And of course, over the last year or two, we have seen dozens and dozens of arrests of former legislators, of the media entrepreneur Jimmy Lai. And we've seen the imposition of the incredibly draconian national security law, which dismantles effectively all basic freedoms: freedom to protest, freedom of speech, academic freedom, and all other freedoms. And it's worth just noting that the national security law also has an extraterritorial component to it. So in effect, it says, in principle at least, that it doesn't matter whether you're a Hong Kong citizen or whether indeed you're outside Hong Kong, anything that you do that is deemed to breach the national security law anywhere in the world will be regarded as a crime. So theoretically, I'm breaking the national security law every day. The bookcase behind me, which is full of subversive books like Joshua Wong's book and Nathan Law's book and the China Tribunal judgment and others, is in effect a crime scene. And even by discussing this subject today, we are probably breaching the national security law. Now, of course, it's unlikely that they would be able to pursue us in Brussels or the Netherlands or London. But it does mean that Hong Kongers outside Hong Kong who want to, at some stage, return to Hong Kong have to be incredibly careful, because anything they say or do outside Hong Kong could be held against them if they do return. So my simple question in support of this effort today is this: does a regime committing genocide and crimes against humanity deserve to host the Winter Olympics? Does a regime that disappears people, including an athlete, the tennis star Peng Shuai, deserve to hold the games? And indeed, can athletes be assured of safety if they go to the games? Does a regime that dismantles freedom in total breach of an international treaty lodged at the United Nations deserve to host the games? And my answer is clearly no. The United States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, Japan, the United Kingdom, Belgium, and Lithuania have all already said that they will not send government representatives to the Beijing Games, a diplomatic boycott. And I understand that Germany's new foreign minister has also said that she personally will not attend. She hasn't, if I understand correctly, gone as far as calling for a full diplomatic boycott, but she at least has said she won't participate. And so it is time for the European Union as a whole and for all member states to reach that same decision. Not, as you said at the beginning, Gary, not a sporting boycott. I believe that is a matter for the individual consciences of athletes. But I would appeal to those athletes that go ahead and participate in the games to consider what they might do after the games are over, not while they're in China, because it would be too dangerous to do so, but after the games are over, to consider how they might use their platform to speak out and draw attention to these issues. But I do support this call for a diplomatic boycott. Applying a diplomatic boycott would send a strong symbolic message that it can no longer be business as usual with a regime committing some of the gravest crimes under international law, that shows total disregard for international treaties and that poses such a threat to the international rules-based order. So I'm in full support of this initiative today, and thank you for inviting me to join you.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to just pass over to Willy now. I'm sure that you've got questions to ask of both our speakers, so yeah, it's all yours.
Thank you very much. That will be at the end of my presentation. First, I want to thank Mr. Peter van Dalen for his constant advocacy for human rights in China, not only in China, and for pushing resolutions meant to denounce egregious human rights violations in China. Is always on the side of those who are persecuted around the world, and this should be remembered. Also, something to be stressed is the resolution that was adopted by the European Parliament on the 8th of July, and that denounces point by point all those violations against ethnic groups and religious groups all over the Chinese mainland. But as Benedict Rogers had just explained how Xi Jinping has been dismantling the autonomy and the freedoms of Hong Kong's in the last 2 years to progressively anchor this special administrative region to mainland China and to submit it to the rule of the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, because that's the main actor behind the persecution in China. The full control of the CCP over all sectors of society is the global objective of Xi Jinping. This is what in the West, I would say, call totalitarianism. And the magic word, if I can use this term, underpinning his policies is the so-called sinicization. And I would like to expand a little bit more about this process. Sinicization is in fact a word that was used since the 17th century, and that indicated the assimilation of minorities in the Chinese empire, Chinese culture and language. The same term was afterwards adopted by nationalist China to signify the effort to replace foreigners who were managing at that time business, religion, civil society organizations by Chinese citizens. The CCP, however, gives the word sinicization a different meaning. It is not enough that organizations operating in China, including religions and churches, have Chinese leaders. In order to be accepted as sinicized, they should have leaders selected by the CCP, the Chinese Communist Party, and operate within the framework of strategies and objectives indicated and imposed by the CCP. In Tibet and Xinjiang, however, the CCP pursues a policy of Sicilization in the traditional sense of the word, trying to assimilate the Uyghur Muslims and the Tibetan Buddhists into the Chinese communist culture. In early December, Xi Jinping personally presided on the first national conference on work related to religious affairs that the CCP had held since 2016. He spoke at the conference and asked for a more in-depth study of Karl Marx's texts on religion by all those involved in the management of religions activities in China. He also reiterated that sinicization of religion means its alignment with the CCP's principles, goals, and directions. And he lamented that the process that he started in 2016 had been too slow and not efficient enough. In the name of Sinicization, millions of Uyghur Muslims are deprived of their freedom to be politically educated or re-educated in camps against their will. In the name of Sinicization, Tibetan Buddhists are deprived of their culture, their language, their religion, their religious practices, and their spiritual leader, the Dalai Lama. Sinicization is a form of resurgence of the cultural revolution carried out by Mao from 1966 to his death in 1976, which devastated the then Chinese society. Their common objective with Xi Jinping right now is the preservation and the reinforcement of communism by eradicating the historical, cultural, and religious roots of the country and by purging it of Western elements. And Christianity is one of those foreign agents, another term used by another very democratic leader, Putin. So it is a foreign agent, Christianity, perceived by the CCP as a threat to its leadership and its rule. What to say about the Sinicization of Christians? How does it happen? Well, as long as Christianity cannot disappear from China, its churches are to be Sinicized, which means to adapt to the socialist society and to be placed under the authority of state organs controlled, fully controlled by the CCP, such as the Chinese Catholic Patriotic Association and the Protestant Free Self-Patriotic Movement. Concretely, it is the CCP who appoints the leaders and pastors of Protestant churches. And concerning the Catholic Church, it is the Chinese government who proposes candidates to be appointed as bishops that afterwards the Vatican has to confirm. Those who try to evade the communist Sinicization and to operate outside its framework in so-called house churches are arrested and sentenced to heavy prison terms. As we regularly report in our newsletter, examples, a few examples, recent examples. In October, November of last year, the CCP authorities carried out a crackdown against meetings of the Church of Almighty God and arrested about 300 of their members meeting in private places. In October of last year, a Chinese Catholic bishop was kidnapped by the authorities and his whereabouts are unknown. He had been arrested 5 times already since 2016 because of his recognition of the Vatican and the Pope as is a spiritual leader. So that was the official reason. But there was also in November last a Christian couple who had a printing house, and they were arrested, sentenced to 7 years in prison and a very heavy fine, I think around 25,000 euros, for allegedly illegally carrying business operations. In fact, they had printed Bibles and a number of Christian books and brochures, which were seized by the local authorities. Also in libraries of churches, you will find lots of books about Mao Zedong, about Zhou Enlai, and about the Second World War battles of China against Japan, and also the Red Revolution. Recently, we had the Christmas that was freely celebrated, I would say, in many countries around the world. In China, it's different. Christmas, it's a Western event. And so that has to be discouraged, and more than discouraged. Those who celebrate Christmas, even in state-recognized churches, are prosecuted. And hotels, which sometimes are used by some Christians for celebration of Christmas and other religious events are penalized for hosting such events. Ben Rogers has shown us how Beijing is currently putting an end to the one country, two systems status enjoyed by Hong Kong and replacing it by one country, one system. The absorption of Christianity, Buddhism, and Islam under the pretext of Sinicization follows the same logic. To engulf into communism with so-called Chinese characteristics, to neutralize them, to catch and to revel in their souls. The next target on the agenda of Xi Jinping might be Taiwan, and we should not forget that. The diplomatic boycott of the Winter Olympics will show which countries, which heads of states, which political parties, which politicians are on the side of democracy and human rights or on the side of totalitarianism. So that's the end of my presentation, but I would like to ask Ben Rogers, what can also be done by the European institutions, the European Parliament here in Brussels, to show that they are also on the sides of the values that they proclaim around the world, and for the protection of human rights in China. What concrete decisions should be taken by the Council, by the Commission, by the European Parliament?
Sorry, before you answer that, can I just, can we quickly go over, I see we've got one of our manifestations underway here. And Leo, if we could maybe get our friends online, I can hear them. Okay.
Hello.
I'm not sure if they, hey, you can hear us as well.
Yeah, we are here in Berlin. I'm Pema. We are part of this event today, calling for the boycott of Olympic 2022. And unfortunately, the event is just winding down, but we are still a lot of people here. We are in front of the German Foreign Office in Berlin. The rally started at the Brandenburger Gate this morning at 9 o'clock. And we marched through the city to the Foreign Office in Berlin, Foreign Office of the German government in Berlin, to demand or to urge the German government to at least boycott this Olympic 2022, which is coming up next month, and do not send any diplomatic delegations to China for the event. So this is the least we could do to show solidarity to the victims of the genocide that's taking place right now in China against Uyghur, Tibetans, and the brutal crackdown of the Hong Kong democracy and the atrocities that's still going on to date. And of course, the brutal and diplomatic and the bullying of the neighbors of China, including Taiwan. These are the things that China wants to hide behind this Olympic Games and show to the world that maybe try to pretend that they are a good member of the international community, but in fact they are hiding their genocide behind this game. So we are urging the German government not to let this fool them and take a stand today and boycott this Winter Olympic 2022. So I would, if you have time, I would like to ask one of our activists to please tell us something more about what we are doing here. Tenzin, can you please say something about what we're demanding here today? Oh yeah. She is from the Tibet Initiative in Germany, and she will tell you something more about the event today.
Well, yeah. Hello, my name is Tenzin Zöchbauer. I'm from Tibet Initiative Deutschland in Germany, and we are support We are a support NGO for the cause of Tibet, and we are standing for the right of self-determination of Tibetans. And today we demonstrated together with Hong Kongers, Uyghurs, and Tibetans and human rights activists in front of the Chancellor and Foreign Minister of Germany, Annalena Baerbock, and Olaf Scholz, to tell them that they should diplomatically boycott the Olympic Games in China, and they should not attend the opening ceremony. We just handed over a petition with nearly 55,000 signatures, which we started 2 weeks ago, where the Germans are demanding that the politics should not join and be represented at the Olympic Games in Beijing.
That's lovely. Thank you very much for waiting. I'm sorry that I kept you waiting on hold there for a little while. It's great to have you here. We only actually found out about one another's events quite late in the day yesterday through our mutual friends in Geneva, who I hope will be joining with outside the UN Human Rights Council in about an hour or so. But thank you very much for coming along. Thank you for letting us know how it's gone there. I am aware of the fact that you're under a bit of pressure because the German authorities are fairly strict about clearing an area on time. So I don't want to keep you, get you into any trouble. But again, thank you from all of us here in Brussels for coming and joining us this afternoon.
Thank you so much for giving us this opportunity. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye. Okay, so we promised Berlin, and Berlin we have. So Benedict, I'd like to go back to you if you could just address Willy's questions.
Yes. Sorry.
Sorry.
So
go ahead, Willy, please.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Oh, okay. Sorry, I thought you were going to say something. Just to say thank you for that question, and thank you for your remarks, Willy. I think it is incredibly important now that Beijing is made to pay the consequences for what it has done, both for its very severe and grave crimes in mainland China, the worst crimes under international law, genocide and crimes against humanity, but also for the dismantling of Hong Kong's freedoms. If it is allowed to get away with what it's done with impunity, with no consequences, then it will just be emboldened to continue to be even more repressive at home, but also even more aggressive abroad. And that will threaten Taiwan, and ultimately it will threaten our own freedoms. So I think we do need concrete measures, and that means, in my view, coordinated, robust, targeted sanctions. I'm not talking about blanket sanctions against China as a whole, but sanctions against both individual officials in Beijing and in Hong Kong, Magnitsky-style sanctions, but also sanctions against entities, state-owned companies that are complicit with some of these crimes, companies that are providing surveillance technology, companies that are closely linked to the People's Liberation Army, companies that are complicit with these human rights violations. And I think that the European Union, the European Parliament should look very seriously at what targeted measures could now be applied. I applaud the European Parliament's decision to suspend the trading agreement with China. And I know there'll be increased pressure from some member states to revive that. I hope the Parliament will stand strong on that, particularly when Parliament members are themselves sanctioned by China. So I hope the Parliament will continue that suspension of that agreement. And I hope the EU will work with other democratic allies. I think it's incredibly important that democracies around the world come together and coordinate their efforts, because when countries act alone, as we see currently in the case of Lithuania, it's easy for China to put them under pressure and to play divide and rule and pick them off and play them off against each other. But if the democratic world, the EU, together with other democratic allies around the world, stands together and coordinates efforts, then it's much harder for Beijing to resist that, and actually it could well make a difference. So I hope the European Parliament will look seriously at what sanctions could be proposed along those lines.
Can I ask Peter for a question? Yeah, so I now have a question for Peter van Dalen. So there are several political groups in the European Parliament. Do you have any idea what will be the recommendations of the political groups for their members concerning any invitation coming from Beijing, EPP, Socialist, Renew, and so on?
Well, you know, Willy, that the Parliament is very critical on what's going on in China. Already, Mr. Rogers correctly mentioned that we have suspended the investment agreement with China. And a few months ago, we have adopted with a large majority a report made by our ECR colleague, Charlie Weimers, on Taiwan. And the Parliament, with a very large majority, gave support to Taiwan through this report of our colleague, Charlie Weimers. So I think the indications are good. What I will find out in the coming weeks is the general position of the Parliament. Next week, I will have within my own political group, the EPP, the Working Group on External Policies. And of course, I will have there on the agenda this issue, the boycott of the Winter Games. And then we are going to see what the rest of the political groups will do. So in a way, this is a test for the Parliament as a whole to see what will be the direction of all the MEPs related to the issue of the boycott of the Games. So we will find out in the coming days and weeks what the stand will be of the members of the European Parliament. But as I said, we have made some strong issues in the last weeks and months already related to China. So I am hopeful, I must say.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you. What I'd like to do now, today, as you're aware, we have all these various manifestations across Europe, but we actually began yesterday in Antwerp. And we have a video of, a short video of yesterday's manifestation, which was held by the Brussels or the Belgian Uyghur Association. So if I could ask Leo if you would be able to share this with us. Yeah, I think here we come.
Next month, Chinese government will organize the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing. But this country has no right, China has no right to organize Beijing Olympic Games, because Olympic Games mean the peace for the world, the peace for the people, the peace for everyone. But in my country, there is no peace for the people. There is no peace for the children, innocent ladies, and innocent young people, and innocent intellectuals. They are all, a lot of Uyghurs, at least 3 million Uyghur people have been taken away to the concentration camp, the bloody concentration camp by the Chinese government. And they are suffering all kinds of violations, all kinds of criminals committed by fascist, authoritarian Chinese regime. Fascist China! Fascist China! Fascist China! Fascist China! Terrorist China! Terrorist China! Terrorist China! Terrorist China! Stop genocide! Stop genocide! Stop genocide! Stop genocide! Stop genocide!
Wij staan hier vandaag omdat wij niet aanvaarden dat de Chinezen aan concurrentie vervallen. waardevervalsing doen. Door Oeigoeren te gebruiken in de werkkampen. Daarvoor staan wij hier vandaag. Wij staan hier vandaag omdat wij vinden dat wij de Olympische Winterspelen niet moeten steunen. Niet moeten steunen omdat de mensenrechten in China worden onderdrukt door een autoritair, communistisch, Chinees regime waarvoor een mensenleven geen enkele cent uitmaakt. Long live! Boycott Beijing! 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 What are we going to do? Boycott Beijing! What are we going to do? Boycott Beijing! What are we going to do? Boycott Beijing!
Okay, so that leads us nicely to our next speaker, who is Koen Stoop, who is the EU Policy Coordinator for the World Uyghur Congress. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me today as well. I would really like to start with expressing our gratitude from the World Uyghur Congress to everybody who has really taken to the streets today in different cities around the world. As today is a global day of action to call for a diplomatic boycott of the Beijing Winter Olympics. Also, the Belgian Uyghur Association, express our gratitude for their really consistent efforts to speak out here in Belgium, but also to Mr. van Dalen, who has been leading also efforts in the European Parliament to this extent. I would like to start to highlight that our calls for diplomatic boycott and our calls against the Beijing Olympics are not efforts that have started in recent months. When China was awarded to host the Winter Olympics back in 2015, we already knew to what extent human rights were being violated in China, not only against Uyghurs, but Tibetans, Taiwanese, Southern Mongolians, Chinese human rights defenders, and the list goes on and on. So really over the past 6 years, rights groups, communities have been calling for, first of all, boycotts of these games, but also to other stakeholders to realize what is going on in China and that China is really not the right place to hold these Winter Olympics. Already in 2015, of course, we saw these abuses, but since then, what we've seen, like the deterioration of human rights, is really unprecedented. Taking the case of the Uyghur people, since over the past 4 or 5 years, we've seen more than 1 million Uyghurs and other Turkic peoples being arbitrarily detained in so-called re-education camps, what in reality are concentration camps or internment camps, where they are being subjected to the worst maltreatment, ranging from torture, sexual abuse, systematic rape, malnutrition, terrible sanitary conditions, and so on. Furthermore, the list of abuses in the Uyghur region includes separation of children from their families, the forcible sterilization of Uyghur women, forced abortions, and lastly also forced labor of Uyghurs by the hundreds of thousands to produce products that are then being exported to Europe and other countries in the world. So taken together, I think it's been mentioned today already several times that taken together, all these crimes constitute crimes against humanity, but it also fits the criteria of a genocide. And this has indeed been recognized as such by now 7 parliaments all over the world, as well as the United States government. And just last month, it was the Independent Uyghur Tribunal that reaffirmed these recognitions of a genocide, ongoing genocide happening. Why I'm starting with that is that from this follows that states worldwide that are signatories to the UN Genocide Convention now have a legal, of course also moral, but now a legal obligation to prevent this genocide from going on. In the UN Genocide Convention, it says that as soon as a state that is a signatory suspects that a genocide is going on, this obligation comes in place where it needs to take active measures, needs to do all it can to prevent this genocide from happening. And I think today, a boycott is, the very least, a diplomatic boycott is the very least that governments can do in response to genocide, not only to genocide, but also, of course, other human rights abuses in China. But I think it's with the reason that these upcoming games are called the Genocide Games, because if genocide is not the red line, then I also don't know what is. The International Olympic Committee has always proclaimed that the Olympic Games are about that sport is being put at the surface of the harmonious development of humankind and the preservation of human dignity. But if we look what is happening in China right now, this is the antithesis of human dignity, human rights, human freedoms. So again, if genocide is not the red line, then I don't know what is. Secondly, and this has been mentioned already before, by sending political representatives to attend the Winter Games, governments are basically sending an approval of Beijing's human rights record, because over the past years, governments worldwide, international institutions have, of course, been vocal in condemning the human rights abuses in China. But now is not anymore the time for words. Now is a time for action. And sending a political representation is also making a statement in itself. It means that you're putting the green light for Beijing to continue its human rights abuses everywhere in China, and that the deterioration of human rights for over the past 6 years means nothing to the international community. And lastly, even though China is always saying these condemnations of the Beijing Olympics in the context of these human rights abuses is politicizing the Olympic Games, I would say Beijing is seeing the Olympic Games in itself as a political event. We've heard already that Beijing is, you can bet that Beijing is going to use the Olympic Games to promote its own authoritarian regime, to promote its as it says, it's ethnic unity, it's synicization of society, basically. So there's plenty of reasons, of course, why governments must now step up and boycott the Beijing Olympic Games. It's the very least that governments can do in the face of genocide and other human rights abuses. And finally, I would briefly like to highlight that the fact that we're now calling for governments a month before the Olympic Games is, of course, something that should have happened way before. Governments should have spoken out before. But in the very first place, it should have been the International Olympic Committee that should have, changed its course. As I already said, in 2015, we already knew of the human rights abuses that were going on in China. In 2008, when China was awarded the Olympic Games, everybody said this might be an opportunity for China to improve its human rights abuses. This might be something for China to improve over the long term. But instead, what we saw in 2008 was the arrest of journalists, the further repression of civil society, and so on and so on. So in 2015, these signs were, of course, already available. But over the past years, I said, we've reached out to governments, sponsors, broadcasters, but also the IOC to make our concerns heard. And the Geopolitical Congress is part of a coalition, the No Beijing 2022 coalition. It's over 200 organizations, also representing Tibetans, Hong Kongers, Taiwanese, Southern Mongolians. And in our conversations with the International Olympic Committee, the sufferings and experiences of Uyghurs, my Uyghur colleagues, but also Tibetans, all the groups that I just mentioned, their sufferings and experiences have just completely been disregarded by the IOC. During these meetings, the IOC just kept hiding behind, its argument of political neutrality. And it basically just said, it's a complex world. But is it really a complex world when, all these abuses against Uyghurs and others have been proven again and again? Is it really a complex world when we've seen, for instance, at the Uyghur Tribunal, Uyghur witnesses, females who have described in person how they've been mass raped or other forms of sexual abuse, how they have been forcibly sterilized? Is this really such a complex world for the IOC that it cannot, even start to condemn China's human rights abuses? And finally, I would also say in the context of Uyghur forced labor, that the IOC has been completely disregarding its responsibility to conduct proper due diligence to ensure that, the products and all other branded materials being used during the Winter Olympics are not tainted with Uyghur forced labor. So really it has started at the IOC, but now we're at a point where we need to urge governments to do their part, not only because it's their moral responsibility, but most of all because it has now a legal responsibility under the UN Genocide Convention to take action. And I think a diplomatic boycott of the Olympic Games is a very good start to do so. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got a few questions that I'd like to ask, but first of all, I see that we do have another manifestation online. Just asking them to unmute now. This one is nowhere near as exotic as Berlin or indeed Antwerp. In fact, it's taking place about 120 yards behind me at Schuman roundabout. I'm not sure what that is in meters. Manel, can you hear me? No. Manel, can you unmute? Manel? Manel, can you unmute? We've got a bit of a technical problem there. Manel, can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah, I hear you.
Okay, fantastic. We thought we'd lost you. We thought you were like one of those mime acts for a moment there. It's good to see you. It looks a bit chilly there and windy.
Yeah, it is. So we have already read so many speeches. So many people have introduced, some chants, and let's say the atmosphere is really cool. Other members of the community are heading to China, the Bank of China, and the Chinese embassy to make a demonstration there right now. And half of the group is here also to support the demonstrations and to support Boycott Beijing 2022. We are here today joining both the community, the Tibetan community and the Uyghurs community to support this action.
Okay, I passed by a little bit earlier actually, and I noticed there seemed to be a sort of a prison cell, a sort of a cage there in the middle of Schuman roundabout.
Yeah,
you managed to find anybody to lock up there?
Not really.
Mr. Barella's not passed?
Yeah, there was a cage, and this cage was really symbolic. So it's a symbol of the persecution and the oppression that the Chinese government uses towards the minorities, especially the Tibetan and the Muslim minority Uyghurs, especially towards children and women, sexual abuse and torture and re-education camps. So this was really symbolic, and it was a great message to the world using these camps and this dehumanization of minorities and marginalization and persecution of minorities.
Okay, Manel, I'm hoping you'll join us here at the Press Club before we finish off. You've not got far to come. And okay. I'm guessing, having been out there for a bit, a coffee would go down very well. And we look forward to seeing you shortly. And hopefully you can join us here on the podium before we finish.
Okay, thank you. So
okay.
I'll join there in a few minutes. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you. Okay, I'd like to, before we go to our next speaker, Stefan Singer, I've got a quick question, which I'd like to, Peter van Dalen appears to have left us. Let me see if we can get him back. Really about the issue of the propaganda coup that is the Winter Olympics. Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about the Munich Olympics, Hitler's Olympics, and what happened shortly after that. Should those Olympics have been allowed to happen? And people have been asking, if you were a politician now in 1936 and you knew what we know now, would you send your diplomats to Munich? The answer would be no. But we could also talk about Sochi, the Winter Olympics in Russia, where incidentally, just days after those Olympics closed, and there was a lot of pressure to boycott those Olympics, that pressure was ignored. Just days after that, Putin launched his troops into Ukraine. What sort of opportunity are we presenting China with now? Do you think that, now if I was sitting in Beijing, I would see the weeks after the Winter Olympics as being the perfect time to launch my troops into Taiwan? And wouldn't that be throwing egg in the faces of the West? Could I ask Mr. van Dalen and Rogers their thoughts on that?
Well, thank you for your question. I think it's difficult to make a comparison between what happened in Russia and their invasion in the threats to the Ukraine and what's now going on with the games in Taiwan. What will they do towards Taiwan? You see, the threat towards Taiwan is already there for many years, and in particular last year, the threats were stronger and stronger. For me, the important issue is that the Chinese government will misuse those Olympic Winter Games. They will display to the world, well, look at us. We are a nice country. We are promoting sports. We are letting in everyone to participate. And the ideal, the Olympic ideal is, of course, to do together sports, and China will show and will misuse this propaganda to show to the world, hey, look, we are a good country. Why do you bother? Why do you, say evil things to us? And that, I think, is already important to highlight now, today, that China will misuse those games, as was done by many dictatorships. You already mentioned some in the past and in the history. And that is one issue why we should boycott with diplomats and with other people like presidents and kings and prime ministers to go to those Winter Games, because it is all a misuse of propaganda, and we should not participate in this propaganda by the Xi government. I think that is important. I do not know whether after the games China might invade Taiwan. That's just speculating. But for me, the issue is stop taking part in this propaganda, this misuse of the Olympic Games.
Benedict?
Yeah, I would just say I agree entirely with Mr. van Dalen. I don't want to get into speculation about what might happen in regard to Taiwan, although I do think we need to deliver very clear messages about standing with Taiwan. But I think that the problem is that for far too long, for too many years, the West collectively has been, in effect, kowtowing to Beijing. We have given Beijing far too much red carpet, if you like, far too much conceding to their wishes. And that every time we've done that, that has emboldened them. I think things might be different today if we had taken a stronger stand some years ago. And so we need to start taking a stronger stand now. And that's why we shouldn't give them this propaganda coup of the games.
Thank you. We have another manifestation, this time outside, I think I've got the name right, the Chinese International Bank of Investment in Avenue Louise here in Brussels. I don't know if they can hear me out there. In fact, I just had a missed phone call, so that probably looks good. I think there we are. You need to kind of change your phone to a landscape type of thing. You need to sort the phone out.
We are here today before the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, which also has a branch in Belgium, with the International Alliance for the Defense of Rights and Freedoms, IDO, an organization that is being consulted by the United Nations ECOSOC. We are enormously concerned about the fact that China's carbon emissions keep increasing. The people from Extinction Rebellion who are here today are also hugely concerned about this. China is really the biggest polluter in the world now, given that its population is also increasing. We are talking about an emission of 2,912 billion tons of carbon in China, which is 3 times more than India, which is doing quite well with 666 million tons of CO2 in 2021. China's total emissions really need to come down drastically. Shame on you, China. Boycott Beijing in the name of Mother Nature. We can never win the battle against climate change without doing everything we can do to drastically reduce China's emissions. Even now, after the Paris Climate Agreement and after Glasgow, we still see China's carbon emissions increase. In fact, China is emitting more year after year, and at this moment, there is no prospects of improvement until 2030. In other words, China is partly responsible for the climate disaster in which we find ourselves. Both with Extinction Rebellion and the International Alliance for the Defense of Rights and Liberties, we are extremely concerned. After all, China has not said exactly how the reduction of carbon dioxide will be achieved. From Xi Jinping's current policy, we find that China's coal consumption will certainly not fall fast enough over the next 8 years to meet the 1.5 degree targets. We hear many fine words from China in this regard. Shame on you, China. Boycott Beijing in the name of Mother Nature. In the past 4 years, China has increased coal production and consumption, contrary to all their fancy new talks and claims. By 2020, China has produced more than 45 gigawatts of additional capacity by opening new coal-fired power plants, co-financed by China's largest banks. The extra capacity added in 2020 alone is as much as the entire coal capacity of Germany, the third largest industrial power in the world. So China is certainly not serious when we look at their actions. We have had enough of the many talking points that China sells. Shame on you, China. Boycott Beijing in the name of Mother Nature. China remains, this moment, the largest emitter of greenhouse gases and now generates more than 1,000 gigawatts of coal power in China alone. More than half the total worldwide and more than 4 times as much as the first and the second users in coal power in the world. Shame on you, China. Boycott Beijing in the name of Mother Nature. China, please stop talking. And also, we ask this bank, the Industrial and Commercial Bank of China, to immediately stop all its investments in such polluting technology that is pushing climate change in the total gear. Stop this now. China must move away from this energy fueled by coal in China. If it does not do so, it will endanger the health of everyone in the entire world. And they will be the biggest responsible for the increase in number of climate refugees in the world and the increased CO2 emissions. With the International Alliance for the Defense of Rights and Liberties and Extinction Rebellion present here today, in coalition with us, we call for an immediate halt and phase out of coal-fired power plant construction in China. If this does not happen, the European Union should impose import duties on all goods related to the amount of the carbon burned to produce it. It's also an unfair competition not to pass on the price of the polluter to the largest net polluter in the world. Unfortunately, it is the only way to change China's minds. Through our action, Boycott Beijing, we also want to draw attention to this. China should change course only in 2030, they say. But today, the climate question is more urgent than ever for us and for the future generation. Shame on you, China. Boycott Beijing in the name of Mother Nature. Shame on the Chinese banks who are still funding Chinese coal plants. It is a shame. We have to recount this here today for this bank, because all Chinese banks, not only this bank, are the largest financiers of coal-fired power worldwide and have financed 70% of all new coal-fired power plants. Shame on you, China. Boycott Beijing in the name of Mother Nature. We know that we currently no longer have access to information on demand for Chinese coal. It's now more difficult to track ships in Chinese waters, hiding trade trends and potential sanctions violations, but also the overall impacts on the climate from the world's view. 02 EPO, one of China's most followed investment finance databases, no longer shares data with foreign countries. Some of this due to the new strict data security laws, but some stems from political considerations. The exchange of academics, for example, has declined sharply. Shame on you, China. Boycott Beijing in the name of Mother Nature. In 2018 and 2019, the Chinese government itself announced it had to shut down 286 cooperation programs between Chinese and foreign universities, where the information is no longer shared. And again, in 2020 and 2021, we see twice as much cooperation programs have already been shut down. This says everything about democracy in China, or especially the lack of it. For us, for the world, for Mother Nature, shame on you, China. Boycott Beijing in the name of Mother Nature. Thank you.
WWF and RDC who work in China, and they work constructively, I must say, with the government, with the institutions, with the trade unions, and with others, despite the, and I'm not questioning that one, despite the democratic suppressions. We as CAN International have no position, I say this up front, no position on boycotting China Olympics. We have different opinions, I agree. We have members who support it, we have members who oppose it, and we have other members who are just neutral on that issue. We as a secretariat cannot supersede that one in one way or the other. So we prefer to work with Chinese authorities. We prefer to work what's possible in China to help our people, our environmental friends in China to survive, given the very restrictive and oppressive conditions. But still, in the context of environmental protection, clean energy, and climate, China is, surprise, surprise, comparably open and transparent. So we have developed with our colleagues there, with our friends there, some kind of space in which we can operate. So I'm saying that one not to apologize or to excuse, but to explain in which conditions we work. With other countries, other regions where for our purpose, for environment issues, suppression is much, much stronger. I can mention so-called Democratic Republic of Congo. I can mention Brazil and other countries where things are not nice. We had last year, at least, and this is an official number, 230 environmental defenders, mainly people who worked against deforestation, indigenous peoples being murdered in Brazil, in the Amazon region, but also in Colombia and Peru, in the Philippines, etc., etc. One argument, I must say, why people in Cannes, some people in Cannes are opposed, not that they're supportive of China, why they're opposed to call on a boycott of Beijing Olympics, is basically they say this is a double standard Western opinion. We should have a general approach to human rights, which is not unilateral, but which is universal. Where have we been as NGOs? Where have we been as Western journalistic media community when Bush invaded Iraq and killed about 250,000 people? Had there been any kind of court issue, any kind of jurisdiction happening against Rumsfeld, against Powell, which contributed and originated a war against the Iraqi people, against a dictator, I agree, a horrible dictator, but based on completely faked assumptions. Nothing happened in the US. So we have double standard. That's what people are saying. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying from the NGO perspective, the issue on China is a little bit more balanced, a little bit more relaxed. I know you don't like to hear that one, but I'm telling you that one openly. One thing, what I heard from this gentleman there, he talked about China being the biggest polluter. Well, if you compare a country with 1.4 billion people with a country which has only 85 million people like Germany, and of course, the emissions are higher. I think it's common sense, and you talked about the global commons, and I appreciate that one. It's common sense that in science, in equity debates, in fairness debates, we talk about the per capita emissions, the per capita rights, and the historic emissions. If we look into per capita emissions, we look just at per capita CO2 emissions, per capita coal emissions, China is not the biggest emitter. They are not. It's Australia. It's Saudi Arabia. US is much higher still. China has a level of per capita emission a little bit higher than Europe on average, still lower than the biggest countries in Europe, like Germany, formerly UK, Italy, etc., etc. If you look into historic emissions, and that's what we need to do because there's a legacy in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide being emitted in the atmosphere stays there for a very long time. At least 40% stays there for 1,000 years and longer. If you look into historic emissions, in China is not as important as the US, as the UK, as Russia, as Germany and other industrialized countries. That's the legacy of the atmosphere. I'm not saying we need to keep these countries, which I mentioned, responsible what their grandfathers did, but just from the legacy in the atmosphere, China is not the biggest polluter in terms of carbon. China had a huge problem with air pollution. I agree on that one. Huge problem. They did a lot in the cities. They did it half-baked. What they did is they closed down lots of coal burners, small coal burners in big cities like Beijing, like Tianjin, and like Shanghai, and they exported and imported the electricity from coal-fired power stations outside the city belts, right? So that basically exported that one. If we talk about export, if you look into if you would apply in the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel of Climate Change has done that one. If you look into the equity of the emissions, how they occur, we use as inventories the emissions to the atmosphere based on where they occur. So you burn You drive your car, you have your coal-fired power stations, you have your oil burner, and this is where the emissions occur. China is one of the few countries, like India as well, one of the few countries whose overall emissions domestically are much higher than they would consume themselves. This is based on export, right? Whereas our countries in Europe, most countries, where import is prevailing, our emissions from the products are much higher than our direct emissions. So much for equity. I don't know how to change that one, but I think we need to keep that in mind. So before we call China the biggest polluter, and they have a problem, I know, we should be a little bit careful and excusing China of not knowing how to achieve their net zero target for 2060, which I committed to prior to the Glasgow conference. Well, the same is true for Europe. The same is true for Russia. The same is true for Japan. The same is true for almost other countries. US even doesn't have a net zero target for 2050, right? So let's be a little bit more balanced in that context. So to get on one issue, which I think is important to keep in mind, what can we do with China to improve the situation for the Uyghurs, for instance? The US, you might know that one better than me, the White House in June has issued a kind of actions against 5 major polysilicon producers in China, upstream polysilicon producers. Polysilicon is the ground material for producing solar panels, photovoltaic solar panels. 50% of global polysilicon are produced in the region of Xinjiang, where the Uyghurs are. Very likely, the verdict is not out there yet officially, it's not been proven, but the likelihood is that 50% of that is being produced under forced labor in these labor camps, unfortunately. So 5 companies are being penalized. The problem is, how do we change that one? The Chinese are doing that one, this forced labor, because they want to maintain their priority in the market for PVs, for solar panel, because overall the prices are going down, but the labor costs in China are going up as well. And as you have seen with textiles, the same is true with PV, but China had a kind of prevailing positions on the market, costs going up, and now the PV producers are going out to even cheaper markets, right? And China wants to maintain that market for a couple of reasons. What we need to do is basically, we need to make sure that the products which come on our markets, the PV panels, if they come from China, are forced labor free and are pollution free. We need certification on that one. That would help. I would say that would help, certification. NGOs could develop that one, but we would need strong backing by governments. There's currently not big interest to do so by governments, I must say, because it's pretty cheap to buy it from China. And they want to get a cheap entry into the decarbonization process where photovoltaics play a big role. Give you an example from my country, from Germany. Germany has committed to 200 gigawatt new photovoltaics in 10 years until 2030. We currently have 50 gigawatts, and these 250 gigawatts, 200 in addition next 10 years, would basically mean that we have 50% of our electricity coming from solar, which is wonderful and great. But much of that one is imported, will be imported, unless we have a strong certification system. But someone needs to impose that certification system. And I think it would be important if the parliament and NGOs and countries would work together and make that certification happening. By the way, that would not be limited to PV. I would also say what the parliament is currently working on, looking into products from in context of the Mercosur agreement with Latin America and with Brazil in particular, to look into environmental aspects of products like beef, leather, soy coming from Latin America, and Europe is the second largest importer of those products, very often linked to deforestation. So far, human rights are not included as a condition, unfortunately. I would love to do that one. I would love to do that one. Let's be consistent across the board. Human rights and environmental pollution must be reduced as much as possible with certification for all products we import. I think that's the way to go, and we cannot just limit it to China. let me tell one thing, what the speaker said. China and Japan, Korea not yet, and Japan have committed in autumn last year, I must say, in autumn 2021, that their export and import banks will not finance any more foreign coal investments. Publicly committed to that one. Will they comply with that one? Time will tell. It was a fight of the NGOs. They're not doing this anymore. That does not mean that existing projects will stop. They will finalize those, mainly in Indonesia, Vietnam, Cambodia, but the same is true for Japan. The biggest now exporter via export-import credit banks, domestic banks, on coal power is Korea, South Korea. So China is stopping that. They will finish the existing projects. I mean, this is everywhere the same. We might not like it. The problem with China is we do not know, and that's a problem everywhere. We do not know how China will, as I said before, decarbonize, because emissions are going up in like all other countries. In the year 2021, which is the year after everything, emissions went down, energy consumption went down, coal went up just like this. Not only in China, went up 12% in the European Union, and went up 10% in the US. It went up about 10% in India, 9% in China. I have the numbers from the IA. It's not only China. So let's be honest and let's be fair. If we talk about the environmental things, and I agree with you, we need to make sure that everyone and everywhere, the decarbonization is happening in a credible, transparent, ambitious, environmentally friendly way that does not violate human rights. I fully agree with you. Fully agree with you. But the same is true with many other countries. If you look at Saudi Arabia, my goodness, the country that is bombing Yemen back into the iron in the Stone Age. Who's talking about Yemen? Who's talking about Saudi Arabia? We are not, because we're getting oil from them. We're a little bit careful here. So I mean, I think if we have standards for international meetings, international conferences, sports events. This is not the Olympics. This is Formula One. This is the Football World Cup. This is international tennis tournaments. Whatever you want, then we need to have the same criteria. Who's talking about Qatar these days, right? So let's work together and have a set of criteria where the international community can work together and say, those are the criteria. And if countries do not comply with those criteria, they will not get the accreditation of those events, right? But for me, this is a little bit ad hoc what we do with China now, I must say. Again, I have a personal opinion. And we as CAN don't have an official opinion. Personally, I mean, I'm a member to Amnesty International. I work with Friends from Human Rights Watch and so on and so on. I've spent time in China. I know the situation. It's dire there. I agree on that one. But we need to be consistent to be taken serious. It cannot be seen. It is an ad hoc event, which comes across by some, you just bash China. And I think we need to avoid that one. We need to be strategic, consistent, and harmonious on all these events which are coming in favor of human rights, in favor of combating environmental and other pollution, in favor of sustainable development. That's what I would appeal to all of us. Thank you.
Stefan, thank you. A couple of little things there I'd like to ask. First of all, okay, well, no one is innocent, as the Sex Pistols so famously sang. It's not that long ago when we were concerned in Britain, certainly, when South American wine arrived on the market, and we realized that in Chile, for example, they were using child labor in the vineyards and they were spraying the crops while the children were working. That's probably about 25 years ago, if memory serves correct. Maybe slightly less. But we've really moved on. The world has really moved on from that. And in South America, the employment practices and the techniques are now of a European standard. China's not moving on, is it? I mean, really, slavery is what we're talking about, slave labor. China's not really moving on there at all. Also about PVs. Well, Germany was really the world leader in that. Germany has always been ahead of the game on environmental issues. I think mainly because you know, Germany had a big head start with the first real green movement, and I'm very pleased to see we have one of the founders of that green movement, Frank Schwalbehoth, with us today. Who, you know, when I turned up to work in the European Parliament and I bumped into Frank, I couldn't believe my luck, because I'd actually learned about him when I was studying environmental policy. Why has this changed? Why is it now China? It's outsourcing, isn't it? It's getting the cheapest product you can possibly find. Everything is price-led now. And so that we get cheaper solar panels, children have got to slave away in factories. We really need to take a good look at ourselves and how we source our products, don't we?
No, I agree on that one. And I think this is true for all products. Does it work? It works, huh? Does it work? Okay. This is true for all products, not only PV. We come into the age of digitalization, technology. So I think Europe must go back and look into what are the products we want to produce ourselves in Europe, which are strategically important for us, which we cannot leave to other countries for whatever reasons. And this is not only China, this is also the US, I would say, and other countries, right? Of course, I don't want to create a fortress Europe, because trade is a positive thing if done in a sustainable way, if done on equal footing for everyone. We are far from that one. So I'm not opposed to trade. I think trade must be fair. The reason why Germany initially started PV, and why the cost for PV went down based on Germany's 100,000 roof program. Frank, you might remember this one. Hermann Scheer, Social Democrat, did that one in 1998, and no one talked about PV at this point in time. It went down, 100,000 roof program for PV, and you won't believe it how expensive the kilowatt hour was. It was about more than €1.20 per kilowatt hour, unbelievable. But it was financed by feed-in tariffs, and then the price went down significantly, and it went down further. But the production of the panels were done before we had a proper state aid guidelines in Europe, and they all went to Eastern Europe and to Eastern Germany in particular, where you had industrial ruins in these areas after the Unification. They wanted to give them something good, and all the initial PV companies, factories who produced PV panels were in Eastern Germany. No state aid guidelines. They were all subsidized by the state, and that's fine. This wouldn't be possible today anymore. And once the state aid guidelines kicked in, it was outsourced. And they said, well, it's cheaper for us to buy it. And then who jumped in was China. And overall, for the rise of PV voltaics in the world, China did a great job, because they industrialized the production, the manufacturing, they rationalized this in a way, and they could export comparably cheap. That this is now based on, very likely on slave labor, is I would say at best, unfortunately, and I would like to do something about this one. That's why I propose certification. That is what the customer can do. That's what we can do, because PV has a role to play in decarbonization. We want to decarbonize. So let's have a certification. And then, guys, if you don't have a proper certification, which is independently accepted, guys, your stuff doesn't get on the market. Simple as that. And I think that's the way how the market works. We have fair trade, we have organic food labeling, we have safe and child-free carpet labels. We should do the same with PV and with other products. Why not? I think that's the way forward, and that would push pressure on the domestic market in these countries to do things differently. That won't change the Chinese regime. I agree on that one, but I don't think that's what we can do anyway from Europe, that we change. I think we're not in the position of regime change anymore, right?
Stefan, thank you very much. And I'm always very happy to make that link between environmental issues and human rights issues. Actually, I have next to me a very good friend of mine, Sajid Hussain, who is a Kashmiri politician in exile. And of course, really, we were discussing, you and I, quite recently in Geneva, during it was the last of the UN Human Rights Council meetings, China's activities in Kashmir, and particularly with regard to water, diversion of water sources, etc. So would you like to maybe say something on this? Yeah, by all means. Of course, of course. Let me hand you the...
Thank you. So Actually, first of all, I would like to reply your question. Uh, with the help of Pakistan, China is constructing a mega dams in Pakistani occupied Jammu and Kashmir. And what they did with their dams and the local populations, they have diverted the whole flow of their dams. And that actually creates environmental issues. And that actually, whenever you diverted the whole river, it creates a lot of problems. I mean, when you diverted the river and it's not flow in a normal way, then it's create a lot of problems. Problem for citizens, the people who are living on mountains. There is a shortage of water as well, and the whole cities have facing a lot of problems in that terms. So actually, I'm first I have to read my whole statement, and I have also mentioned, because China has started China-Pakistan economic corridors in that region, which is actually passing through Pakistani occupied Jammu and Kashmir, Gilgit-Baltistan. And Gilgit-Baltistan is very much part and parcel of Jammu and Kashmir. And what they did, they are going to establish a road infrastructure and a lot of, they have not allocated a single penny for the environment. When there are emission of carbon dioxide and carbon as well, but when the glaciers are going to be melt, it disturbs the environment. How the environment, we are living in Brussels, and in January we have 15 degree, and the whole weather of the world has been disturbed. So my submission is today's China. Okay, China, if China, with the help of Pakistan, have started different projects in the name of BRI or Uber or China-Pakistan economic corridors, first they have must allocated some funds for the environment, because when the glaciers will melt there, then definitely create a disaster environment, and that not only disturbed Gilgit-Baltistan or people of the Jammu and Kashmir, but it also disturbed the whole world weather. So I'm going to start my presentation today, and if you have a question, I can answer your question as well. So good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and I'm grateful to the EU today and all the organizers of this conference and different virtual events across the world, which has taken a timely initiative to discuss the Boycott Beijing 2022 with a diverse and distinguished panel. When we discuss EU diplomatic boycott of Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics, this is very significant to know the ambiguous Chinese position towards Jammu Kashmir. Yet over the years, there are countries that have used the Kashmir issue for their own interests. China, for one, has not had a concrete policy on question of Jammu and Kashmir, choosing instead to capitalize on the issue for their own agenda and its expansion design in South Asian region. Despite the inconsistencies, however, Beijing policy has historically been inclined towards Pakistan. This has become clearer over the time, despite China vacillation as well as its categorical strategies showing J&K as a part of either India or Pakistan or else an independent territory. The 1962 China war with India led to its gaining control of seizable land and mass in exile in Leh and Ladakh in Jammu and Kashmir. At that point, it became a stakeholder in Jammu and Kashmir issue. A year later, the China-Pakistan Border Treaty of March 1963, which transferred the Shakzam Valley just northwest of Siachen Glacier to China, allowed it to enter Pakistan occupied Jammu and Kashmir and established a direct access to Afghanistan and come close to India, western and northern borders. China is an illegal occupier of Jammu and Kashmir as well as Tibet. It is a historical fact that the territories that is still under the illegal occupation of Pakistan and includes both the territory measuring 5,180 kilometers square in Shakzam Valley in the Trans-Karakoram Tract ceded Pakistan to China under their so-called border agreement of March 2nd, 1963, as well as approximately 38,000 square kilometers of the territory of the erstwhile state of Jammu and Kashmir in Oxygen, illegally occupied by China. China also broadened its covert assistance to Pakistan missile program and military modernization. After back and forth on the Kashmir issue, true intention have become now clear. The PLA, the People's Liberation Army, was intended to establishing a foothold in POJK to control the region militarily and diplomatically. Nearly 11,000 Chinese military troops were deployed to POJK, suggesting that Pakistan had de facto control of territory to China. Rejecting the media reports about the military presence, Beijing described Gilgit-Baltistan as in northern Pakistan. But the real fact is that Gilgit-Baltistan is a part of Jammu and Kashmir. Another reports that formally followed shortly described the presence of some 7,000 non-combat soldiers in POJK, comprising constructions, communications, engineering units of PLA, People Liberation Army. Beijing's apparent escalation on Kashmir issue, at least in terms of the publicly stated foreign policy stance, has helped China divert short-term and medium-term gains, such as also positioned China in an advantageous position vis-a-vis India over the long term. This became clear with China announcement of its One Belt, One Road road project in 2013. Since the China renamed the Belt and Road Initiative BRI flagship, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor passing through Pakistani-occupied Jammu and Kashmir. The mega projects are affecting the environment and weather, and China has not allocated any fund for it. China is constructing these mega dams and different projects in a disputed area of Jammu and Kashmir without consent of local population and ignoring their ownership in these projects and also ignoring ownership on their natural resources. China and Pakistan have not signed any accord with the people of Jammu and Kashmir on their governments before building these mega projects. China has simultaneously been strengthening its military ties with Islamabad. Beijing clandestinely supplies Pakistan with nuclear missile and technologies to counter India's prominence in South Asian region. While such efforts began in 1959 with China and Pakistan building a Karakoram highway. Indeed, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor is central to the hegemonic pursuit of China in South Asia. The selection of POK in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir for developing the strategic important China-Pakistan Economic Corridor yield multi-dimensional advantages that go behind the obvious economic effect. In other words, the China-Pakistan Economic Corridor will give China access to Arabian Sea and develop an alternate route for its critical energy imports and other resources and acquire yet another gateway to Afghanistan. So I am, due to scarcity of time, I am skipping some of the things, but the China dual policy on terrorism, that is very much important, which I want to share with you. China is only permanent 5 nations of the United Nations Security Council that has preferred to take a non-committal position on the issue of cross-border terrorism. Beijing came out in direct support of Islamabad in case of Jaish-e-Mohammed chief Masood Azhar in United Nations Security Council 1267 sanction committee. However, China close tie with Jaish-e-Mohammed and other Pakistan supported terror outfit which safeguard its economic and strategic interest in Pakistani occupied Jammu and Kashmir. China is therefore likely to continue to use the terror group within the POK to keep India busy along the LRC and inside the Kashmir Valley. The presence of the Chinese PLA, People Liberation Army, within the illegally occupied territories of Pakistani occupied Jammu and Kashmir and its northwest and exciting and its northwest further deteriorate the situation which may create threats to peace in South Asia. Dear friends, the European Parliament has overwhelmingly passed a resolution calling on diplomatic official on boycott the 2022 Beijing Winter Olympics in response to continuing human rights abuses by the Chinese government. In escalating tension between the EU and the China, the non-binding resolution also called for government to improve further sanctions, provide emergency visas to Hong Kong journalists, and further support Hong Kong to move Europe. It was passed by the 578 votes in favor, 27 vote against, and 73 abstentions, and was supported by the European mainstream political groups, including the center-right European People's Party, group of German Chancellor Angela Merkel, and centrist of the France, Emmanuel Macron. The 28-point resolution and the call for EU officials and the member states to decline all government and diplomatic invitation to 2022 Winter Olympics unless the Chinese demonstrate verifiably improvements in the human rights situation in Hong Kong, in the Xinjiang, Uyghur region, Tibet, Inner Mongolia, and elsewhere. The resolution has focused on the Hong Kong crackdown and cited numerous specific instances of concern, including notably the shutdown of a pro-democracy newspaper, Apple Daily, and prosecution of a staff and owner of the instruction, and used the national security law and dubbing community hostile and changes to the education, the court, and elections. I think the European Parliament resolution regarding EU diplomatic boycott of Beijing 2022 Winter Olympics, in which reflects the collective wisdom of the European Union citizens, as well as the will of the people. We must respect the aspiration and will of the people of EU citizens, and we have to strongly support EU diplomatic boycott of the Beijing 2022 Olympics. Beijing detaining thousands of Uyghur Muslims under the pretext of counter-terrorism operations. The Chinese government systematically prosecute the Muslim Uyghurs minorities in Xinjiang, according to the Amnesty International. So this was my presentation, and I think 1 or 2 pages are left, and it is taking too much time. So, what is my focus on today's presentation is, if we are a democratic people and we can't accept from China democratic norms and values or any actions like Europe. As a Kashmiri, and we are living Buntans, and what we think about Europe and what we think about America and what we think about China, even we can share some cultural values or some dishes or some food with Europeans or some international community, but we do not share anything with Chinese. And the most important thing is, whenever China establish any foothold or any company or any setup or any mega product, they have destroyed local culture. They have destroyed each and everything. For example, I'm going to give you an example. My brother is an engineer and he was jobless. And he has applied for a job in Islamabad. And he was an engineer, and he was installing software of the different cameras of the, and a Chinese company has hired him as an engineer. And believe me, when I discussed with him, what is your salary and what salary you got from after 1 month? And he says that it is only 10,000 rupees, mean less than 50 euro. Mean in Belgium, a normal person can earn in 1 day 50 or more than 70, 80. And believe me, the Chinese system is totally based on exploitation of skilled workers and laborers. What happened with Bata? Bata is a company who actually made the shoes in Pakistan. When Chinese came in Pakistan with different projects, they have overtaken all the companies, and now, they have made some cheaper things, cheaper shoes, but the quality has gone somewhere. And they have, a lot of people have been unemployed, and they are exploiting basically the natural resources of the people, and as well as they are exploiting the labors. And that is very much important. That is our bottom line. If we are okay, we are living in Europe and we respect democratic values. We are, we are striving for more democracy. And we are also following, the people from South Asia, people from the Kashmir, what we are expecting from the European Union. European Union has formulated a policy on Jammu and Kashmir. We are expecting from a democratic institutions, they must link up their relationships, their trade, not only with China, Pakistan as well. I always say they are partner in crime. Pakistan and China, they are partner in crime against humanity. So first thing, you have to link up all the pledges which you have made with China or Pakistan. For example, if China is not ready to give rights to the Uyghurs or other people, you must link all the international obligations to these pledges. If you do not fulfill that, human rights situation, if you do not want to improve that human rights situation, we are going to cancel that. We are going to now. European Union is very much famous for a soft power, but European Union must use a soft power to China, to abandon China for taking that action, to force China to respect human rights. When China is not respecting international human rights, they have disturbed all the international legal orders. You mean the international human rights or the European conventions? China is not respecting the international declarations or international pledges. So that is all from my presentation, and I have skipped all the presentation lot. I have actually 7-page prepared my 7-page presentations, and I will share with all of you, and maybe you can. Okay.
Sorry, just to cut you off quickly there. I know Stefan has a question for you, but first of all, I see we've got Geneva on the line. Hey.
Let's make China accountable. Let's make China accountable.
Excellent. Can you hear me there? Do we have anybody here? We've got another one here. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yes.
Hello.
Hello, everyone.
It looks very windy where you are there, but
Yes.
I know that space. It's very open and exposed. Okay, so welcome to Brussels. Even if it's only virtually, we've had a very interesting and quite a strongly worded debate here. We've been speaking to other members of the Tibetan community here and also in Berlin. And so it's a very great pleasure to see you there by the broken chair, I think that is behind you.
No Olympic Games! Save Tibet! Save Tibet!
Okay, can you hear me now?
Okay. Yes, I can hear you now. Thank you.
Great, great. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much for having us.
Please tell us how's it going down there? What are the main issues that are concerning you at the moment? I know that you're very well organized and focused, aren't you, with your campaign?
Yes, we are definitely. Recently, all the Tibetan organizations in 14 different European Union countries have had a series of meetings where we have decided to organize countdown for 1 month. We have decided to organize demonstrations in front of United Nations today and on 3rd of February too. And here we are, even if it's a working day, here we see that we have about 100 people gathered here in front of United Nations. My name is Karma. I'm the president of Tibetan community in Switzerland and Liechtenstein. And Tibetan community in Switzerland and Liechtenstein is the largest organization here in Switzerland. And today across all of Europe, during the human rights, with all the human rights defenders, organizations are organizing many rallies in different cities, calling for internationally coordinated diplomatic boycott against the Winter Olympic Games in Beijing 2022 for the following reasons. We Tibetans, in principle, we are not against the Olympic Games or any international sport events because we are standing for the spirit of brotherhood, equality, and friendship between the peoples and the countries. The question is, does the government of Chinese party deserve the chance to host any major international sport events such as Olympic Games, given its worst human rights situation? For us, it's a very, very wrong signal that International Olympic Committee is sending to the world by allowing Chinese government to host Winter Olympic Games 2022, which has been perceived as undue international rewards to Chinese government for its systematic repressive policies against peace-loving peoples of Tibet, East Turkestan, and Southern Mongolia. The Chinese government imposes its illegally occupied countries like Tibet a Han hegemony by enforcing a policy of total sinicization of Tibetan identity in every aspect. Tibetan language, culture, and even Tibetan Buddhist faith. So we condemn People's Republic of China, and we urge all the European Union countries, especially Swiss government, to boycott sending diplomatic representations to the opening as well as the closing ceremony in Beijing. Any questions from your side? Any comments?
Would you care to respond? Any questions?
Yes,
concerning
definitely.
the Tibetan position at the moment?
Yes, definitely.
Yes, so about the Tibetan issue, of course, we have all been aware for years and even decades of your situation. You are really deprived of your freedom, all your freedoms, freedom of association, freedom of assembly, freedom of religion, freedom of expression, and you're also a victim of the transformation of your ancestral lands as part of Tibet is now part of other regions, and the purpose is of course to put the Tibetans into a minority situation even in their own region, as there is a massive import of Han populations in the Tibet region. How do you think that you and we in the West could have some impact on the policies of Xi Jinping nowadays, try to curb that trend of making the Tibetans a minority in their own region.
Yeah, Gary, you are absolutely right. It's been 70 years that Tibet has undergone all the systematic repression, torture that you have mentioned, and it has still not stopped. Under Xi Jinping's leadership, we have a culture genocide-like treatment in Tibet. Recently, in 2021, I'll not go back so far, but in 2021, we have also school children, for example, Tibetan children as young as 4 years of age are removed from their parents and the Tibetan community and been sent to state-run boarding schools, and they are forced upon it. And not only that, monasteries were turned into Chinese communist propaganda centers, and monks and nuns are subject to under political indoctrination sessions like the re-education policies, and this is done on regular basis. And Tibetan college graduates have to give political tests. Imagine on Xi Jinping's spot for any kind of job recruitment and any form of Tibetan culture identity, Tibetan Buddhist practices, like visiting monastery, listening to His Holiness the Dalai Lama's teachings, and saying prayers are now illegal and a crime. And as recent as 12th December in Trango village in Kham region in Tibetan tradition is Kham, whereas it is incorporated into Sichuan province, we have seen, and you have also already seen, that 99-foot tall Buddha statue along with 45 prayer wheels are destroyed under the pretext of land use law, whereas this statue was built with the permission in 2015, and then the Chinese local Chinese authorities have applauded, and it was also to ward off the natural disasters. So China really is almost, for us, we can do an analogy of coronavirus and Chinese Communist Party's policies. You know, coronavirus mutates and we have deadly variants like Omicron, whereas the Chinese Communist regime's brutal crackdown on any dissent, be it in China itself, in Tibet, in Eastern Turkestan, in Southern Mongolia, in Hong Kong, and the Road and Belt Initiative in parts of Asia is also a threat to the global world peace and stability. So we feel that Chinese Communist Party does not deserve to be awarded to host the prestigious Olympic Winter Olympic game in 2022 until they rectified their policies and give more democracy, more freedom to people living under their authority.
We want justice.
Do you hear me, Gary?
I do indeed. I do indeed.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
And we feel that if a complete boycott is not appropriate now in a country that stands accused of genocide, when will it ever be? That's our question. And Tibetan community in Switzerland and Liechtenstein have also sent an appeal letter to the president of Swiss Federation, Mr. Ignacio Cassis, and we also sent a letter to the National Olympic Committee here in Switzerland. We have requested the parliamentarians and the president not to send any delegations during the opening and closing ceremony in Beijing.
That's great, thank you. You know, it always impresses me whenever I'm with members of the Tibetan communities, Falun Gong, Uyghur, Kashmiri, how people who are suffering so badly managed to conduct yourselves with such dignity and restraint. I feel that if I were in your position, I would be a much angrier person, but of course that would get us nowhere. So, you know, congratulations, you do this so well. You get your message across so clearly, and you're so focused. I think that you should really be commended, not just for standing up against this tyranny, but the way in which you conduct your campaign.
Yes, Gary, we will definitely stand for human rights, rights of the people, right of expression. You know already that you have mentioned Falun Gong. Falun Gong practitioners are also meted with brutal crackdown also in southern Mongolia for propagating their language or teaching the children with their own mother tongue. In Tibet as well, it's happening. We have boarding schools coming up. So I have already made the analogy, like the coronavirus mutation, and it is becoming more lethal and more deadly. Chinese Communist Party's policies are becoming more lethal and more deadly. So you will see already that we have stopped genocide in Tibet, boycott Beijing Olympics 2022. We have saved Tibet, boycott Beijing 2022. And we have also Uyghur friends who are here with us today. We have also a Part Tibetan community in Switzerland and Liechtenstein. We have Tibetan Youth Association of Europe here. We have Tibetan Women's Organization in Switzerland. We have Swiss Tibet Friendship Association and many other human rights defenders with us in front of United Nations. So thank you very much for covering us. And we hope really that Switzerland doesn't send the delegations to China. And today, really, we condemn Communist Party of China. We condemn them strongly with our words because Tibetans in Tibet are suffering and they live in Tibet. It's not a barbed wire re-education centers, but Tibetans inside Tibet are really living like a hell on earth. So we really urge for boycott of Beijing 2022 to the world leaders and be on the side of the human rights and for the dignity of the people. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for joining us. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay, I know that Stefan had a question. If we could fairly quickly, because we're running a bit short on time, but you had a question for Sajid?
Yeah. Thank you, sir. This was interesting. I've short two questions. You said during your speech that you would recommend that all countries, European countries in particular, which do deals with China, should put human rights as a priority. And if those human rights are not complied with, the deal should not go ahead, right? Did I get you right? Now, I'm German. We have a situation, interesting situation, that our foreign minister, Annalena Baerbock, she wants to have, and she's foreign minister now from the Green Party, and she wants to have human rights issue as one precondition for foreign policy. Now, another Green minister is, and Frank, you know the situation, is our Minister for Economy and for Climate Change and Energy, Habeck. He's a powerful minister. He has not been outspoken on that one because the coalition treaty says that Germany should maintain its economic advantage in being a net export nation. So we are one of the few nations who have not only a net export balance, positive net export balance, but also with China. So we're importing much more to China than China imports to us. I think that's an exception in Europe. So what would you tell the German minister? What would you tell him? And saying, listen, guys, you might have to drop your export focus in order to preserve the priority for human rights as proposed by your Green colleague. How would you persuade him? I mean, I'm just interested in that one. The second question to you is, if I may ask, when I was last time in China, this was in 2019, we had meetings with different people from universities, from the state regulation authority and others. We talked about wind power stuff, some renewable energy stuff. And I was, at this point in time, I was reading in the papers that, not in China, that Malaysia, but also Pakistan had problems with some of the Chinese projects of the Road and Belt initiatives. similar as some African countries on land grabs and others. We haven't talked about this one. So I was asked the Chinese authorities and said, listen, guys, if you do your road and belt initiative, you need to look into, and you said it correctly as well, you need to look into environmental sustainability issues significantly as a precondition for making those projects viable, acceptable for the people, to provide something better than the business as usual. So what, and I mentioned that one, I said, what would you say if Europe would start a kind of, they wouldn't name it this way, a road and belt initiative, which would be in a kind of competition to you guys. And the Chinese were laughing. And they were saying, oh, Europe doesn't get its act together. They said it in a diplomatic way. They, probably based on experience, they said Europe doesn't get its act together. We have seen a couple of weeks ago that the European Commission has started, interestingly, an exercise to allocate 300 billion euros for a similar thing. They wouldn't call it a competition or a challenge to China, but they would call it their own export and infrastructure development for developing countries, similar to the RBI. And there might be more money coming in. They're looking also for extra funding. They look for private investment. So what would you recommend what Europe should do in your regions to address those issues you mentioned correctly, the potential freshwater crisis, the benefit for the local population, et cetera, et cetera. So what should Europe do in your region?
Actually, when I want to reply your question, so I was thinking about what are the options left to improve the situation. I mean, as far as my concern is, China has occupied my land. That is one thing. That is exciting, and Shexam Valley. Then definitely Europe have a very strong policy, and Europe have formulated policy in 2007 and passed resolution by majority. That is a constant. That is not the question of what I'm saying and what you are saying. Europe has already formulated a policy about Jammu and Kashmir vis-a-vis India, Pakistan, and that South Asian region. And the author of that policy, Baroness Emma Nicholson, and we have given our input in during that resolutions. As far as concern your question about what German can do to finish either the historical accord of trades or like things. What I'm suggesting, for example, European Union have a bilateral, or EU has a relationship with GSP plus, a trade relationship, a status. And I don't think so. If your nation or your government is not ready to take a drastic action, but then set a timeline between taking some certain measures. For example, as a European, as a democratic nation, you have to engage either China or Pakistan to take certain measures to improve your situation. That's why I am in this panel today to express my views. This is an Olympic where Europe is going to join that Olympic. If Europe is going to boycott this, that is a strong message. That is strong message as a democratic nation, as a European nation. We have voted for a resolution. We are going to boycott. You have to take certain measures. You have to improve the situation regarding human rights. You have improved the situation religious right, and you have to ensure the fundamental freedom. You have to ensure the freedom of speech. You have to ensure the freedom of expression, and you have to respect our international pledges which you have made or you have just signed. Okay, that is one thing. That is my point of view. If that is, whenever we talk, we are living in European Union, and we must focus on your policies regarding Europe is a big power, is economic power, is leading the world after United. For example, what happened in 1980s? when United States boycott the Russian Olympic, when Russia invaded Afghanistan, okay, what happened next? Or that is decentralized USSR, but that was a step. We do not want to be China to be decentralized as like this, but at least in case of Taiwan, in case of Uyghurs, in case of Tibet, in case of people of Jammu and Kashmir, they must respect the human rights. There is no other option left. If you are not going to boycott Olympics, then I don't think so you are going to finish all the pledges or trade agreement to finish instantly. But slowly and gradually, you can take some certain steps to ensure and for the safety and security of the people. For example, in European Parliament, we have joined Ilham. We have started a campaign, Ilham Tuti. I think most of people maybe know. I mean, what happened, that is another thing, but we have to strive for the people who are suffering, the people who are suffering in concentration camps. If we do not become voice of those people, who can talk about them? That is very much important. I mean, this is not just a simple thing. You are okay, you can finish. Believe me, the countries have their national interest. We do not want countries do not have a national interest. They always protect their national interest. But at least if they do not become a voice of voiceless, then who is going to stand with those people? That is very important for us. Thank you.
Sajid, thank you. I'd like to ask Manel to come and join us. She was, as you will recall, at the Schuman roundabout in the wind. No rain yet. Thank you. Manel.
Thank you, Gary. Thank you, everyone. I would like to thank everyone who contributed to this big event and to this these demonstrations, as well as actions from different parts of Europe, but also human rights organizations and journalists who participated to cover the events. So my speech is divided into three parts, and would focus on minorities, especially the Uyghurs, the Tibetans, and but also human rights, and as well as free media and journalism, especially what is happening in Hong Kong. As Gary said, we were in Schuman roundabout with representatives of the Tibetan community, as well as representatives of the Uyghurs community. And there were demonstrations and chants to call for freedom regarding minorities, but also to call for boycotting Beijing. And this gathering in front of the European institutions is a great message. It's really symbolic, and it's a message to the world that human rights matter and minorities in China do matter. So many countries has joined this boycott, including Belgium. Human rights and women's rights and organizations cannot ignore the suffering of these Chinese minorities, mainly the Uyghurs, victims of forced labor, sexual abuse, and torture. Boycotting Beijing 2022 is sending a message to the Chinese government that human rights matter. The Chinese government should stop its policy of marginalization towards the minorities, and boycotting Beijing 2022 is an act of rebellion, resistance, and also solidarity towards all these innocent victims of ethnic cleansing and imprisoned against their wills in, I quote, re-education camps. Witnessing these human rights violations of the 21st century is a disgrace to humanity. I'm really happy that Belgium has joined a diplomatic boycott of Beijing in 2022. With Prime Minister Alexander De Croo vowing the government will not have a presence at the Games. I quote, "The federal government does not intend to send any representation of the Olympic Winter Games in Beijing." I believe that this is a strong message from Belgium, but also other countries joined like Britain, Lithuania, US, Australia, Canada, and New Zealand. Regarding the situation and human rights situation of Beijing, there is a lot of reports, including Human Rights Watch, that nearly 1 million people have been detained in estimated 300 or 400 detention centers throughout the Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region since 2017. And there were sentences and heavy sentences without process. And according to this report, the population of Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region does not exceed 1.5% of the total population, but the arrest in Xinjiang Uyghur Autonomous Region accounted for nearly 20% of the total number of arrests in China. So there is a policy of discrimination against the Uyghur community. Also, there is this policy of denying the religious freedom. Mosques, at least 2/3 of the mosques were destroyed in this region, and a large monitoring network throughout the state is collecting DNA samples, fingerprints, scans, blood types of the residents of the Xinjiang region, ages between 12 and 65. So there is a huge dehumanization and discrimination on the basis of religious affiliation. Also, these systematic human rights violations are widespread, and also there is a suspicion of a genocide on the basis of religious affiliation, especially regarding the Uyghurs. Regarding the Tibet, we have the Tibetans have even less civil and political rights than the Chinese, governed by the Chinese Communist Party. So there is a discrimination against the Tibetans because there were arbitrary detention and punishment threats, sometimes accompanied by verbal and physical violence. Any act which is believed to threaten the rules can be punished, and also we have a closely surveillance, camera surveillance, police surveillance, violence for protesters who are imprisoned, tortured, or even shot dead. So this repeatedly violent actions of violence is reported by UN experts as a violation of UN treaties, especially the torture regarding political prisoners who were arrested and sentenced for peaceful acts, for example, for just waving the Tibetan flag, or calling for their families who are detained in jail, etc. So these actions mainly reveal the policy of the Chinese government regarding the Tibetan, which wants to eradicate the Tibetan culture and the Tibetan identity as well. Also, we have the idea of belonging, or the idea of the idea of ethnic belonging, and also the fact of of showing pride to mention Dalai Lama is also forbidden by the Chinese government, and this shows that any culture, any ethnic belonging is not approved by the Chinese government. Regarding the Hong Kong issue, hundreds of people, many of whom supporting democracy, have been arrested under laws targeting institutions suspected of terrorism, separatism, weakening the state of power. And also we have, I quote the international human rights expert in Amnesty International saying, within a year, the National Security Act has transformed Hong Kong into a police state, causing a human rights emergency for its inhabitants. So there is a lot of repressive laws which threaten transforming these cities into human rights deserts that are more and more similar to mainland China, end of quote. So it is clear that China violates human rights, individual freedoms, freedom of speech, religious freedom, as well as freedom of belief or thought, by persecuting ethnic and religious minorities such as the Uyghurs or the Tibetans, or by shutting down the media and threatening journalists in Hong Kong. The third media firm was shut down a week ago, and journalists from the Hong Kong news site Citizen News denounced the decline in press freedom in the territory hours after announcing the cessation of their activities for fear for their safety. We should stand by the oppressed people, and we should stand for freedom and for the European values. And that's why I would like to ask everyone today to support these actions. And as Mr. Sajid mentioned, if here in Europe we do not support minorities, where else in the world are we going to support minorities? I would like to end with a quote by Dalai Lama, considering human rights activism as a kind of spiritual practice. I quote, "I consider human rights work or activism to be a kind of spiritual practice. By defending these people who persecuted for their race, religion, ethnicity, or ideology, you are actually contributing to guiding our human family to peace, justice, and dignity." End of quote. Thank you very much for standing for peace, justice, and dignity.
Manel, thank you very much. Thank you. You know, Manel, you and I, we've worked on quite a few projects relating to human rights, and particularly, you know, minority rights, the rights of minorities. What I'd like to do now is to not so much bring the event to a close, but to possibly open a new doorway here, a new chapter, because there's one particular human rights issue which we've not really discussed here in Brussels, as far as I'm aware. And again, it involves communism, which has been the elephant in the room. We've not really discussed the ideology of Marxism here, have we? This dehumanizing ideology. But what I would like to do is to pass over to my very good friend here, Hoang Hai Nguyen, if I pronounced correctly. It's close. And I don't know, Manel, how aware you are of what's going on in Vietnam at the moment. We know people who are Tibetans, who are Uyghurs, who have come here to get away from the barbaric practices of the Communist Party in China. Well, actually, this gentleman has come here to get away from the barbaric practices in Vietnam. We've known each other for a little while, worked on one or two little projects, but this is the first time we've managed to get you here. And so I'm just going to hand over to Hoang now, and then I'll come back to you,
yes,
Manel,
sure.
because I suspect this might be something that you're not as familiar with as I have become because of my friend here. And I'll welcome your perspective on what he has to say.
Yes, sure.
Thanks, Gary, and thanks, everyone. I'm very honored to be here today. Firstly, I would like to show my solidarity to minority people in China. But as a Vietnamese, I read a lot of books. I read a lot of books about China, and I know that in China, the Han is the #1, and no other ethnics are similar. And also I knew that I know that Chinese leader in history, they are very cruel, and I think that the current Chinese leader generation, the current generation Chinese leader, they are more or less the same, even though they might say beautiful words to comply with the Western value, but in the core heart, they are very much the same as their older generations. So back to my presentation for today, I would like to probably bring a bigger picture for the why I'm here today. First, to support minorities like Uyghur, Tibetan, and people in Hong Kong, but also I would like to bring probably a big picture about the current situation we are here. I think that we are we are under the threat of our democracy is under threat. For example, 1 in 3 Belgium thinks that it's better to be managed by an authoritarian government, or in US, 2 out of 3 think that the US democracy is also under threat. We don't talk much, but nowadays the situation is completely different from 1989, when the fall of Berlin Wall. People was so optimistic, think that democracy is going to spread all over the world, to the 4 corners of the world, and I thought that it might come to Vietnam, to my home country as well. But I don't. I think that view is too optimistic, and the reason for that is I think is just to mention again about the situation that nowadays big corporation, multinational, they comply with Chinese authority, even though their headquarters are in the West, like in Europe or in the US. We see that international companies, they comply with sorry. Okay. So it's backward is like that. Okay. Yeah. So so you see that our democracy is under threat, and why we are here, why we are a situation we are here today. For me, this is the diagram I made to demonstrate that initially the West thought that by cooperate with China and by the power, by the leverage of the capital we have, by working together with Chinese leaders, they can change China. But after 30 years, 40 years, what we see now, China is influencing us. Nike, Intel, they all apologize to China, and they will criticize the Western world, the democracy. So it's really a game changer. And one of the reasons is that we underestimate the authoritarian, the dictatorships in China and in Vietnam. The same way the West treat China and Vietnam is the same way. They underestimate the opponents. Look at the diagram. You can see that in China we accept that the West accept that China can install the Great Firewall. So YouTube, Twitter, Facebook cannot be accessed in China except for Chinese officials. But we pour money there. We put capital to China. And the policy of the West is, I think, it's too lax to negligent. We don't find enough for the practice of we haven't fought enough. We haven't done enough to fight disinformation. So that's why people doubt very much about democracy. For example, look at the battlefield of democracy in Vietnam. I think that the policy should be changed. The European Parliament legitimized the election in Vietnam, even though there's a lot of reports about the election in Vietnam are unfair, are fraud. One candidate is just sentenced to 5 years in Vietnam, and the Europe just lost one golden opportunity to push to improve the human rights situation in Vietnam by the EU-Vietnam trade deal, the EVFTA, the free trade agreement. The EU Parliament just lost this golden goal. They have a leverage to do that, but they didn't do that. Why I said that the West mistrust about its partner, Vietnam or China, because they thought that in the case of Vietnam, they thought that they thought that the Vietnamese leaders are very stubborn. In fact, they're stubborn, but they are not idealists like the generation in the Vietnam and American War. In the Vietnam-American War, they are stubborn, but I think that they might be idealists. They can also be patriotic. They love the country, but this generation is completely different. This generation is completely different. This meal costs about probably some 10,000 pounds or 8,000 pounds. Okay.
35 exactly.
35,000 pounds. Yes, and with the salary of the minister is about $600, and he can afford this meal, and this he enjoys this meal when he was in London, which is not very far from the place where Boris Johnson paid an attribute to 39 Vietnamese victims in a tragedy where the Vietnamese people flee the country to find a better hope, better future. So the minister, he was in the UK and he didn't pay respect to his people, even though Boris Johnson, he's an English guy and he paid an attribute. So Boris Johnson, he's more human than he's more patriotic than our minister of security. So okay, so thank you very much. I think that's thank you very much. Yeah.
Manel, do you have some thoughts on what Hoang has just said?
Yes, I see that. First of all, I would like to congratulate him for this speech and for these inputs, because they are really openers to us, because we don't have access to this information. Actually, my thoughts are is that it's really scary. It's really terrifying what is happening, especially regarding the elections. regarding the fraud of elections. So this means that the government was not really elected by the people, and that there is a Chinese intervention within the elections, and this is very, very terrifying to democracy in this region. Also, I know that Vietnam has a history with I mean, it used to be a French colonization, so there is a kind of, let's say, France is also close to Vietnam, so a lot of French activists are supporting, especially human rights and freedom of speech, mainly, and journalism in Vietnam. And what I was seeing that with the journalist who is imprisoned for 5 years, it's really terrifying to see that. I'm really scared of what is happening to Vietnam, and I would like, as you said, unfortunately with the EU-Vietnam deal, nothing happened. I think that they should reconsider this deal, and they should support democracy and free elections and independent elections, especially from the Chinese intervention. Thank you. You're welcome.
Also, so the China is the source of model, the inspiring model for Vietnam. So, so we should boycott Beijing 2022, so that China know that there will be consequences for their action, and Vietnam will also notice that as well. So that's also my message. As I asked the colleague to play the song L'effet papillon, but the effect of butterfly. So one action here has a consequences on the other side of the earth.
Absolutely.
Well, I'd like to thank everybody for being here physically today, and for all the people who have joined us online, particularly Peter van Dalen, Benedict, Rogers, and to Willy Fautré from Human Rights Without Frontiers. Willy and I have worked on a few projects recently, and they've all been, I would argue, successful in that we seem to be having an influence. I'd just like to say also about the people who have taken part in the manifestations. This has required an enormous amount of organization to get all this together and to make it all happen. Here we managed to get every manifestation that we'd planned here today, and I'm rather surprised it went so well, but thank you very much to Leo, who does all the technical stuff here at the Press Club. We always know it's going to work when Leo's here. But if you were here before he arrives, you can see how stressed I can get. The question is, what happens next? Will there be a diplomatic boycott? I hope so. If it happens, I'll be very glad. I will thank the European External Action Service. If it doesn't happen, we'll hold them to account. We're going to have plenty to say. But one thing that I can tell you will happen next is when the athletes return from the Olympics, when they come back from Beijing, we're going to be approaching them and asking them for interviews. And we're going to be asking them to come here and tell us what they saw when they were in Beijing. We didn't call here for a boycott by the athletes because, first of all, it's never good form to ask for something that you know you're not going to get. It also allows people to use the argument, but you know, these guys have trained all their lives for this. It's a very valid argument, but it's one which kind of kills the demand for a diplomatic boycott. Fingers crossed. Let's hope that the European Commission does the right thing. And I look forward to us all meeting here when we can celebrate some good news. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Gary.